Okay, great. So, good afternoon or good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Welcome to the Asia Solar Energy Climate Change Conference organized by Carbon Care InnoLab and funded by the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust. I am Kevin Lee, your moderator today. I have actually over 25 years experience in sustainability and climate justice with several international and local NGOs. I am now a researcher with Carbon Care InnoLab, a leading Hong Kong climate NGO. It is my great honor to welcome you to this vital section on the, on the section called New Horizons for Solar Energy, exploring the investor's role in defossilisation and decarbonisation. Solar power holds tremendous potential to rapidly reduce emissions and mitigate climate change devastating impacts. But realizing this potential requires mobilizing investment for solar energy at an unprecedented. Today, we will explore the crucial role of investors in driving the renewable energy transformation. This section aims to provide strategic insights on solar investment, overcoming key obstacles, seizing the opportunities in this rapidly evolving sector. We have assembled an esteemed panel of experts of leadership, research, and real-world experiences focused on the investor's pivotal role. First, we will have Mr. Pascal Viechat, Associate Director with Deloitte Carbon Care Asia. He will draw on his diverse expertise advising organizations across the Asia-Pacific region to shed light on the latest solar investment trends, challenges, and opportunities from an investor perspective. Next, we will have Mr. Tong Ho, accomplished leader in climate finance and clean energy projects with over a decade of experiences across Asia. As country director of Allotrope Partners, he will provide an in-depth overview of renewable energy progress in East Asia with a focus on the dynamic Vietnam market. He will highlight some of the key trends, challenges, and opportunities in this dynamic and fast-growing market. And we are also happy to bury Mr. Walter Marine, a pioneering global leader in the solar home systems and mini-grids. With his almost 40 years career bringing solar energy to underdeserved communities in developing countries worldwide, he will share an unparalleled on-the-ground perspective. And finally, we will have the eminent economist, Dr. Fahad Tadej Hezari, author of over 250 publications on renewable energy finance. He will illuminate the latest research on analyzing the factors influencing the demand and supply of solar modules in Japan and diversifying investment strategies to energize our low carbon future. I really look forward to a thoughtful dialogue as each speaker presents, followed by discussions and Q&A section. If you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box and we will try to answer them towards the end of the section. Let's explore the investment pathways powering the world with clean energy. Without further delay, it's now my pleasure to begin by inviting Mr. Pascal Viechat to share his insights and overview. Pascal, 15 minutes now. You have the floor now.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Highly appreciate it. And thanks a lot for having me today. While I share my screen, very much looking forward to discussing with you the topic today. I'll be sharing an overview for the engagement of corporates in the field of renewable energy in Asia, and particularly Asia Pacific, for then the coming speakers to give a bit more light into some of the examples, as I just mentioned, as Vietnam or others, and looking forward to discussing those topics with you further as well as part of the panel discussion. My screen full screen now, just to check quickly.
Yes.
Very good. So let me start, right? So we are kind of, advising corporates throughout Asia Pacific on the topic of how to more strongly engage in the renewable energy market. I think for a very long time, I've focused on the supply side, and I think it's very so how can corporates invest, engage in the renewable energy market is very, very strongly picking up in the region here. And that's kind of the topic I also want to lay of foundations for the discussion later on. And we have the three following topics for the next 10, 12 minutes in terms of understanding how to participate in the renewable energy market in different key jurisdictions across Asia Pacific. Then I want to shed a bit more light in terms of what kind of market transactions, how corporates engage, how they invest across Asia in renewables, mostly solar, of course, as it's the topic of today. And then as a last part, have a bit of an outlook in terms of where's the road going, what's still needed, and what might be some of the hurdles which we need to overcome to allow even more corporates and investors to participate in the renewable energy market. With that, let me start with a consulting slide. Every time I realize that it's a bit too many words, but I'll make it, try to make it interesting for you going forward, laying the foundations a bit around the topic of corporate clean energy procurement. So when we talk about the role of I want to take a bit of the lens for today of the roles of corporates and how they can engage in the topic of procurement. And some of my colleagues will show you some of the very, very detailed case studies afterwards to supplement the foundations I will be sharing now. What we see is a rapidly growing market. If we see on the right-hand side of the slide, we see kind of the top 5 corporate power purchase agreement markets in 2022. So power purchase agreement being one of the ways of how corporates can engage on the demand side in the renewable energy market, directly engaging with renewable energy developers, procuring renewables for their operations. And we have seen that picking up in different jurisdictions already for quite some time, be it the US, be it different European jurisdictions. But as of late, now also very strongly in Asia Pacific. You see China, Bangladesh, India on the top 5 list as of late. That has been the case for very long, but it's great to see that the Asia Pacific market
slides are not visible.
Growing very fast. We have a bit of an echo in the line, but just stop me in case it's on my side, right? What we see is that
see your slides. We cannot see your slides.
All right. But maybe please mute yourself on the line in case that's possible. In terms of kind of what we see in the market is that lots of power purchase agreements are being done mostly via solar. I think if you look at the different markets, India, China, predominantly done by solar, underpinning again the very, very strong role solar has in terms of allowing corporates to invest and secure more renewables. One of the other main points here is that even though we see large Asia Pacific uptake, still the region is only representing 15% of the global kind of power purchase agreement market in terms of procuring renewables directly. So there is lots of potentials for corporates and investors to continue to engage in the market and to kind of increase that percentage share overall. Also, if you look at in terms of the companies who have signed up to RE100, so RE100 as an association where companies can sign up and commit to 100% renewables by 2030 for their operations. Out of the 22 companies which have signed up here in Asia Pacific, only roughly 1/3 has kind of entered into some kind of renewable energy procurement via a power purchase agreement, showing very much the opportunity there is for companies to continue to engage in this market and the potential for the years to come. Now, if you look at driving then the next steps in terms of corporate renewable energy procurement in Asia Pacific, there's kind of 4 key drivers I want to introduce as part of this introductory sharing session. I think great to see that we see evolving regulatory frameworks which allow corporates and investors to engage more directly in a otherwise very, very heavily regulated market, which is the power market. So we see these reforms, latest announcements out of China just a few days ago, which again will kind of add transparency, add credibility and the market for corporates to engage much more directly as compared to what they have done so far. Not only China, but we see the same kind of coming out of countries like South Korea or Japan, easing the market entry barriers for those companies to engage in renewables and Mostly, still, I'll get that there in a second, mostly those power purchase agreements are driven by solar and to a larger extent now also wind energy. Now, of course, we all know the economics of renewables have very much helped in kind of driving this case forward. It's now in certain jurisdictions very much a business model where signing and engaging in the renewable energy market as a corporate investing into even renewable energy projects is not only good from an environmental point of view, but it's very much also a business case for the companies to engage in, helping to kind of spur action in the field. And the third one I want to share here is Asia Pacific, of course, as an overall region, accelerating the journey towards a low carbon future. That means, making sure supply side regulatory elements are also in place. We see huge amounts of installment around the region, which helps energy suppliers to continue to develop at pace or even increase pace, as we know we need to reach our climate targets. Last one, I think we also see from the demand side, and I think that's the topic of today. So how can corporates, investors more engage into the field? We see a growing interest, very much looking at it not only from a pure target fulfillment point of view, but also very much looking at how can we as a business engage in renewable energy, and in that case, mostly solar, by also making it a commercially viable business case. We have 400 companies who have announced their RE100 targets globally, and 2/3 of those are headquartered. So that shows the commitment, the interest, the push. And I think now we see the first kind of ramp up of these companies actually engaging much more strongly in the renewables market to leverage some of the which we have. That's the drivers, right? In terms of some of the opportunities and challenges which we have here, I think it's very much on these two topics I mentioned just before. We have a policy push and we have a corporate push. So we have the policy side, be it kind of the more institutions around RE100, SBTI, which is picking up very strongly, and which has very specific renewable energy kind of targets in there, which allows companies then also to kind of take this as a basis and push for kind of market solutions and be active market players in the field. But at the same time, I think the regulatory barriers, the procurement options are increasing in terms of availability, allowing companies to engage much more directly. And I think one of the live case studies we'll see for Vietnam in a second. So in terms of APAC, I think we have different jurisdictions. Of course, we have different kind of unique features within each of these jurisdictions. But one common trend that it's definitely kind of becoming commercially much more attractive. The upside of premium payments is still widely available for certain jurisdictions, but it's getting very, very, very small, which allows corporates to be much more engaged and invest into renewables, while also seeing it as a low carbon opportunity for them to engage in. That's on kind of setting the scene in terms of where we are at in Asia Pacific in terms of corporates and the corporate world being an active player in a so far otherwise quite heavily regulated and monopolized market. A bit of an overview and a bit of a benchmarking. I think I just want to show you here, a bit of the nuances between the different jurisdictions. I think it's quite clear that, of course, there's big differences between Asia Pacific countries where we have the different key parameters, right? I think around economic, technology, regulatory, and market for you to have a look at. And in terms of whether you want to venture in certain markets, it's also a bit of a hint in terms of which markets might be a bit more to kind of be tackled for corporates to invest and engage into renewables. As mentioned, I think the Indian market is a very interesting and good one. Vietnam we'll see in a bit. I think lots of changes in the recent months as well, whereas Australia, Singapore might be already a bit more advanced on certain regulatory aspects. Now, in terms of kind of the outlook in terms of the next steps, right, and the market so far. just quickly checking that you can still see my PowerPoint presentation, right? And it is still visible. All right. I didn't touch anything. In the PowerPoint power purchase capacity, I think what we see is definitely the role of solar being a very dominant one. I think in certain markets, for instance, India, more than 80% of the contracts are done with solar, kind of underpinning the role of solar also going forward. I think we see similar things in other jurisdictions, as I just mentioned before. Now, just very briefly in terms of market transactions, as I get to the last few minutes of my sharing, India and China, as an example, we see great developments in terms of regulatory announcements, which have allowed corporates, investors to engage into renewable energy very, very directly. In China are allowed now to invest equity stakes into solar and wind parks, other renewables as well, but mostly solar and wind are being invested by corporates with the new changes, and which allows to for the technology to grow even further. In the Indian case, we see a great potential with the commercial attractiveness of direct corporate power purchase agreements for companies and investors. Sure that market is growing fast. The same can be said, to a certain extent about Malaysia and Indonesia, as well as Singapore, where the regulatory changes have really helped to spur private sector as well as corporate investment into renewables, allowing them not to only fulfill their targets which they have set, but also help the technology solar market to grow at a very, very pace, as we all know. Last point, right? If you look ahead in terms of setting the scene a bit for the coming presentations, I think when corporates engage and invest into renewables, has been done via certificates. This is still one of the major ways of engaging into the renewable energy market, but we see definitely the more direct forms of investing and engaging into renewables via power purchase agreements, or via even investing equity shares into renewable energy assets in different jurisdictions, Asia Pacific, to grow, helping to also then advance the solar technology at a much higher speed as it used to be, even though it's already very high. But we all know we need to have these these technology growth curves to be even higher. Last point for me today, I think a bit on the regulatory side. I think that's also something which we focus on a lot. It's still a very key element in terms of allowing investors and corporates to engage in the market, and there's lots of movement on that side. I want to leave you with that note. I think it's critical to be very market specific when to invest into renewables or to engage into procurement of renewables in terms of which jurisdictions you're in. Lots of different regulations at place, and what we see happening is that there's really a push towards an international standard. It's really more the push towards localized, tailored certification schemes for renewables, which we see happening across the region. China, with the latest announcements just a few days ago, doubling down on their green electricity certificate, which is a mean for corporates to engage in the renewable energy market, is one example of that. So a complex market, an interesting market where corporates have now much more opportunities to engage, solar being one of the prime technologies, continue helping corporates procure renewables and meet their targets, and very much looking forward to the sharing now of some of the case studies and more tangible examples by my colleagues. Thanks a lot, and let me stop sharing my screen.
Pascal, for your sharing. Now, probably let's go to our next speaker, Mr. Tong Ho.
Yep. Can you hear me now? Let me share my screen. Would this be okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you so much for the presentation and the sharing on Asia Pacific. Perhaps now I'll go into a little bit on ASEAN, but before that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Tung Ho. I am the country director for Electro Partners in Vietnam. I'm based in Ho Chi Minh. And in Vietnam, we have this nonprofit initiative called the Energy Investment Accelerator, or CEIA in short, where we partner with the World Resources Institute and also the National Renewable Energy Laboratory from the US to push for, I think, a very similar topic on corporate PPA. So enough of that. The content for today, I'll just briefly go through the different, perhaps a little bit of an update on the Vietnam renewable energy market, and then going into case studies and the different that the country has on corporate renewables. And last but not least, perhaps a brief mention of the investor role in financing these kind of projects in Vietnam. So, very quickly, I think CEIA is a nonprofit program that has a presence in Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Mexico, and Colombia. And what we do is to promote and support corporate PPAs to take place in emerging and frontier markets like Vietnam. And to do so, we firstly, tackle policy engagement. That is a small part of our work, but I think the heavy lifting comes in when we help to and tender different corporate PPAs in the country. And we do that using, funding from Department of State and foundations, and also some fundings from multinationals that's looking to decarbonize its supply chain. So that's the kind of the three that we're trying to push here in Vietnam. Before that, I think it'd be perhaps let's start on a positive note. Last year, Vietnam has witnessed a surge in the capacity installed for solar, wind, and rooftop solar. So, these are figures from last year, where we saw a 16.5 gigawatt peak of solar coming up online, of which about 10 gigawatt of these are rooftop. And then I think by 2021, we also saw like more than 4 gigawatt of wind, that is utility scale, getting connected to the grid as well. So that's a major boom, in the market. Though following that and the expiry of the fin tariff mechanism, we do see a little bit of a decline in the renewable sector. So that's why for the private sector, we're trying to focus on pushing towards corporate PPAs. And with that, what kind of options do you have in Vietnam? So for Vietnam, I think there are two, I guess, major options when you do corporate PPA for the power sector. The first one, obviously, is rooftop solar. Is the market has matured. You have many players in the market, and the kind of commercial offer is very competitive. And then on the other hand, you also have what we call the direct power purchase, the DPPA, is basically a virtual PPA mechanism that is being, I think, worked on by the government and different players, which I will cover this in later slides. But perhaps let's just focus, zone in on the rooftop solar aspect. Um, sorry, this slide just talk very briefly about the on-site option, which is rooftop solar. However, if you are talking about energy, you can just go beyond power as well, where we have renewable heat, which comes in form of biomass procurement, solar thermal or heat pump or electrifications of boilers that you have in factories. So these are all the different options you have on site. And I'll go into the off-site section a little bit after. So the different, renewable options when they compare against one another, The on-site procurement for solar in Vietnam, you need to immediately look at the cost saving for solar. So in Vietnam, if you enter into a kind of a corporate PPA contract with, let's say, a solar company, you will enjoy about 10 to minimum of 10 to a maximum like a 30% cost saving compared to the uh, kind of a usual electricity tariff that you have from the grid. And this, of course, this number varies by locations and then by the kind of energy demand from each factory. And the usually the kind of coverage that a solar system can attain for factories is about about 50% for like a medium-sized factory, but down to about 5 to 10% for any huge factories with very substantial kind of energy demand. So basically, I think rooftop solar is is economic, it is very popular, and it's very easy for factories to get on this. What is a bit more complex and perhaps more significant in terms of the energy demand coverage is the offsite procurement method, which is virtual PPAs or anything similar to that, whether that is synthetic PPA or financial PPA. This kind of solution can cover up about half of your energy use, and certainly there is some cost saving mechanism when it comes to the contract for differences with these things. So I guess I will go into the offsite procurement later on. Now perhaps let's look at the rooftop solar aspect. So rooftop solar, as I mentioned there, you can do PPAs in Vietnam, which means that a party solar company will come in and invest into the system for you and install and operate and maintain the system. Basically, they will sell you the solar energy at a discounted price. So basically, in this mechanism or arrangement, there will be no cost to you, and you can start to reduce emissions and also save some of your costs from day one, and then you don't have the trouble or hassle of taking care of the system or operate the system. So these are the more popular kind of arrangement in Vietnam. But also you can, as a factory or off-taker, you can choose to invest in your own solar system. This certainly the kind of capex you're looking at is much more significant. Though, however, you can own the system yourself, and you can get the maximum kind of saving the from the energy that's generated from the system. And then, however, these kind of turnkey or capex solutions are a bit more popular among, I guess, bigger factories and who can, have the kind of financial capability to invest in their own system. So in Vietnam, most of the transactions that we have supported are in terms of the PPAs. So just citing one example in Vietnam. So we have supported this factory to, I think, at the time, procure energy solar system, and you're looking at here the kind of final product from the solar company themselves. The system is about 1.6 megawatt peak in terms of capacity. It covers about 50% of the energy demand by the factory. So this, to me, is a great, it's a great kind of example that showcases the success, from this program. However, let's just perhaps go to the kind of offsite procurement a little bit, because we do have last case study there, but I want to specify that it's very important. This kind of virtual PPA, mechanism, basically it is a way to a way for factory to procure clean energy without the physical delivery of the power itself. You will, enter into a contract with, with a power generator, and then you basically buy off energy from them using a financial mechanism. So what is so that I have limited time. Um, to put it very simply, you are buying clean energy from solar farms, or, without any transmission line in between, and basically you're doing that via financial contracts. So, a particular mechanism in, I guess, more kind of open market, uh, like the U.S., Europe, Philippines, where you have different players in terms of power generation, transmissions, and then you have different distribution companies out there. In Vietnam, we only have one utility scale utility provider, that is EVN. So that is getting this kind of mechanism approved was had been very challenging, and we're still waiting for the kind of final approval from the government for this mechanism to take off. And however, if it ever takes off, there are a lot of benefits so far, but there are also limitations. The benefit is that factories can now meet 100. If you have an RE100 target, you can meet that target for sure, and then you can also receive all the kind of cost saving if there is a kind of spot market uh, pricing mechanism in there. So these are the very key mechanism for big players like Samsung or Apple in Vietnam to achieve their goal. However, the limitation is that this mechanism is pretty new and is very challenging to implement in a market like Vietnam. So there needs to be amendments to the existing laws that we have. We are trying to push for that for sure. And I know I'm not too much time left. I'm just want to go through this slide very quickly. Um, So focusing on this slide, what we do in Vietnam, specifically for rooftop solar and perhaps eventually for the virtual PPA, is that we do a group procurement of of skilling. So instead of helping just one factory, getting rooftop solar, we get multiple factories under few brands in Vietnam. For example, let's say Nike or Adidas, if they want to decarbonize their vendors or supply chain, they ask us to come in and have support like 10 factories to hold procurement and tender to select one best and install the rooftop solar for them, and henceforth provide the best kind of commercial and technical bidding for that group of factories. And this way, we can actually scale our solutions and then also provide the solar company the kind of portfolio that they need to get the right financing and eventually to make the business case for clean energy adoption in Vietnam. Um, so this is one of the examples that we have for a chain of what we call mega market in Vietnam. We help 12 of these establishments to get a total of 16 megawatts, solar PV, rooftop solar installations across 12 sites. And then the emission saving was very significant, and it is great that we come in as a third party consultant without taking any money from the supermarket themselves. We do this on a grant kind of basis, and afterwards we also create tools and reports and guidance for any other factory if they replicate this kind of effort, they can do the same thing. So yeah, last slide on this. I think aggregation of demand for clean energy procurement has been a success in Vietnam. We have helped multiple projects in the past 5 to 6 years to get rooftop solar, and then hopefully also in the past year, biomass clean heat procurement as well, and then eventually, hopefully, we'll have the chance to have virtual PPA procurement across multiple sites because that's the kind of future that we look towards. And I'll end my presentation here, and I look forward to discussing this topic with the speakers.
Thanks so much, Mr. Paul, for your presentation. Yeah, I learned a lot actually from Vietnam's case, I guess, because there's lots of different arrangements of energy procurement. And now, probably, let's go to Mr. Montgomery. We have 15 minutes, and you will present a very totally different, I would say, the purposes and also the scenarios. Actually, you are promoting the developing countries. Now is your turn, Mr. Montgomery. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me today and in this very exciting panel. I was very amazed to see what is happening in Vietnam. That's very good for the planet. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so as Kevin introduced me, I work to provide electricity to the very isolated rural community in the world. So I want to share my experience in a different angle from the on-grid, that is more the experience from Mr. Tong in Vietnam. And talking about the tremendous impact that the investor can do in the off-grid sector, and especially in the project that we are promoting and we are investing, that is a really good offsetting solution that made impactful to the community. I think it's undoubtedly that we talk about climate change every day, that we are at the tipping point. I don't want to stress more on this topic. I think is it discuss more, is true, is not true. I think we need to fix it. So it's our responsibility to fix this problem of the climate change. And the issue is that the temperature is growing every day because there is a carbon emission rise worldwide. We never, after 28 COP meeting, we never experienced a decreasing of the carbon emission in the world. It's increasing. So that's why I come to the decision of my last venture, that is Plug the Impact, that we have to align our net zero target with the Sustainable Development Goal to generate the solution. Plug the Impact, we are a social and climate aligned investment company. We are creating high value, high impact, and sustainable project. And we want to act as a bridge to connect this project with the company who want to make and just an equitable energy transition toward carbon neutrality. Our mission is to encourage and support the economy and social development of the rural community by providing the means to drive their growing through renewable energy solution. We plan to use our past experience and channel into a new sustainable and impactful mission to lead the change toward carbon neutrality. We talk about more corporate climate responsibility. I think every corporate, every individual, every investor need to come to this that we have a global corporate climate responsibility. There's no doubt about that. And that's why the corporate moved to net zero. To go net zero, just want to clarify this point because I think there's a little bit confusion, is to reduce greenhouse emission and or to ensure that any ongoing emission are balanced by removal and compensation. So on the global race, net zero is the point at which the CO2 related global warming stops. So this is our target. This is why the community has set the target for the 2030 to achieve this level. So business worldwide are starting to make this transition to net zero. Failing to join this sustainability race would be catastrophic to both the business reputation and the climate. So that's why we come to understand that the project that we are executing on the field is really benefiting the plan in terms of carbon reduction, carbon avoidance, and also social impact. So in order to achieve absolute zero emission, reducing the production of the CO2 is a key. Those emissions cannot be further reduced are called unavoidable emissions. So our project is a carbon offsetting project, is a really nice activity that can reduce, compensate the production of unavoidable emission elsewhere. The potential of the solar energy has been emphasized by Pascal and by Mr. Tong, and really, solar energy is a gift that we have in the planet, and we need to treasure that. So, and we see that it is the time to stop burning our planet and start investing in abundant renewable energy all around us, as Antonio said very recently. So these energy resources offer multiple benefits to consumers, support the decarbonization, and improve the resilience. But it's not enough just to rely on them. We have to work all together toward an equitable transition. And when we talk about equitable transition, we talk about improving the people's life. I don't know if the people know that there is almost 1 billion people in the world that they never have access to electricity or to a basic daily service. And we experience in our 20 years doing this kind of project that energy deprivation undermines humanity and hinder the people of equal opportunity. And we see that the climate change disproportionately impacts the developing world, exacerbating the inequality. So nowadays, the growth and the progress of the developing country depend on the fossil fuel-based solution, and helping the community to develop using the renewable and sustainable energy help to avoid the massive emission from being released. This would usually boost the CO2 reduction for the year to come. And the potential of the Sustainable Development Goal number 7. The Sustainable Development number 7 say the target is to provide the energy access to all in the world by 2030. So, but unfortunately, if the trajectory we have today, we are going to miss this target as in some of the other Sustainable Development Goals. So, and here is our solution. Our solar home system is a type of off-grid solar power designed to provide electricity to home and other small buildings that are not connected to the grid, especially in the very remote area. Here, you see the picture in this slide. This is a house that we electrified that was very close to the south of Argentina. The nearest point for the connection was 100 kilometers. So this house has the opportunity to have electricity in the night, and then the light that can provide connection because you have a mobile phone charging. You can have a router, and then you can even see the TV. So solar system used in this remote area and provide clean and reliable electricity without the need for fuel generator, which can be expensive and polluting. If you think about the 60% of the energy produced in the remote area is via diesel generator, fossil fuel. So you can understand the tremendous impact on the carbon emission. And here is a little example, a little glimpse I want to give to someone to understand the enormous carbon impact that is provided by a solar home system. I think many people are familiar with deforestation, and then people want to plant trees, and then they are very happy to to provide support to plant tree. And the comparison is very simple. A full grow tree can provide 22 kilo of CO2 emission per year. And one of our small system can provide 250 kilo per year. So it's 10 times more efficient in terms of carbon impact on the global CO2 emission. Oh, here's some of our track record that we have done in the past 10 years. We have developed a national project in for 20,000 households, in Peru for another 12,000 households, and in Myanmar for 10 schools and 3,000 plus students impacted that can have access to the electricity and to the basic need. So what make our offsetting project special? Offset project can also have significant social impact on the community where implemented, particularly in a rural area where access to basic service such as electricity, clean water, and cooking fuel is very limited. By investing in offsetting projects that have both environmental and social impact, organizations and individuals can not only reduce their carbon footprint, but also contribute to the sustainable development of the rural community. This is our current project that we are implementing in the South Africa country in the east part close to Durban. There is a WWF reserve called Pondoland, and we started to implement the first 1,000 houses. And the Plug the Impact project aimed to ensure access to clean energy derived from the solar, installing 10,000 solar home systems in every household that wish to participate to the project. What next? The final stage involves scaling up to reach more people and achieve a greater impact. That is why we also have a new project ready to implement it that can be found in our portfolio project. Each project can be tailored for the investor need and follow specific impact criteria to make sure. We are always looking for more partner and investor to be able to grow our portfolio and as well as expand the impact to our current project. And last but not least, there was a lot of scrutiny about offsetting and the role of the offsetting. In our experience, transforming challenge into opportunity is really the issue. Offsetting is not just a temporary fix. It is a vital step toward achieving a sustainable and carbon neutral future. When implemented effectively, offsetting can have a tremendous impact on the human and the environment. So by taking action today, we can contribute to the collective effort of reducing our carbon footprint and creating a more sustainable world. And here's the final of my presentation. And back to Kevin for the next.
Your presentation, you present your case of particularly in benefiting the poor communities in the developing countries. And probably let's finish the final presentation from Dr. Fahad. Now you have 15 more minutes, and please go ahead.
Very much, Kevin. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
So, can you see my slides? Can you see?
We can see your screen.
Okay. So, thanks to the organizer for inviting me to this interesting event. So we had good presentations. So my presentation is from another angle, and I'm going to present one of our recent studies, result of it, that we analyze the factors that influence the demand and supply of solar. modules, which are, I mean, when talking about the total cost, I mean, solar modules are a significant part of the total cost of the project. So the presentation is from this published work, which is available. If you are interested to read more about it, you're welcome to download this paper and read it. So presentation, I mean, this study is on the case of Japan. First of all, I provide some background information and presenting what we have done in this study and what are the results and what are the policy recommendations that we have for Japan and other countries. So Japan, especially after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in March 2011, faced significant energy insecurity and energy scarcity. Before Fukushima nuclear disaster, a significant part of the total electricity basket used to come from nuclear. However, after the disaster and due to the nuclear shutdown, Japan had to rely more on importing more fossil fuels, especially coal, LNG, and also gradually increasing the share of renewable energy in the total power generation basket. However, renewable energy projects have more difficulties comparing to, for example, coal and the LNG projects because of existence of risk, because of lower rate of return. Although most recently it's getting better, but investors are still showing not enough interest for investing. Another reason being energy transition. I mean, beside the energy security matter, environmental concern is also another driving force for energy transition in Japan, especially, and relying more on renewable resources. So because of these reasons, Japan, since although almost completely relying on energy import, has higher necessity for developing domestic sources energy projects, which is green energy when you don't have nuclear power. And on the other hand, it is important to assess that what are the driving factors in the demand side and in the supply side of this market. And in this study, we looked at solar energy, especially we looked at solar modules. So this is an evidence for what I have mentioned, that after March 11, 2011, after Fukushima nuclear disaster, the nuclear power capacity became almost, although gradually it is increasing, I mean, resuming by considering the spatial safety matters. But share of coal increased, share of natural gas, LNG increase, and solar and some other renewables are also showing some more significant role in the total energy basket. So when we are looking at the global of solar modules, so for the case of Japan, Japan used to be larger when we looked at 10 years ago. However, currently it's very tiny, and China is dominating the global solar supply, solar module supply. Share of Japan is small. So in the next part of, this shows the importance of this study, that we need to, if we want to set right policy in the government side for incentivizing the demand side and also the supply side in the solar market, we need to find out that what are the determinants, and we need to set the policies in line with those determinants. So this means that not all types of subsidies are workable, and it need to be studies that what subsidies, what policies are moving this sector and governments to focus more on those studies. And this needs to come from studies. So when we looked at the literature, in majority of the studies in the literature, they are mainly focusing on the supply side. And in the supply side, the main factors that they highlighted are from technology, technological progress, learning curve, price of other sources of energies, or price of raw materials, but majorly looking at the production cost and so on. So without considering the economic factors, considering the monetary factors, and without considering the demand side factors. So we found out that there is a gap in the literature, and we try to fill this gap. So we developed a model, theoretical model, that I briefly provided here. The full one is available in the paper. That are the factors in the demand side. For example, the economic activities is important. When the economic growth is increasing, boosting, therefore it would be more demand for different types of energy, including the electricity which is coming from solar. Price of competitors or sources of energy are very important in the demand side, behind the other economic variables and also the monetary variables. So in the demand side, also we consider the policy, including the feed-in tariff that has been implemented in Japan in 2019. We consider it as a dummy variables. Also, price of oil is important. Price of oil price is also included, since it is considering as a substitution. And in the supply side, also we have several variables, including the interest rate, since the production is more capital oriented. Therefore, cost of production is important, which is the interest rate. Price of solar, electricity, and which is coming from the PPAs, and price of silicon is important. Exchange rate is also matter, since in many cases for producing the modules, you need to import components from different countries, and it's a product of a supply chain. Therefore, the exchange rate is important. And these are the variables that we used in the demand side and in the supply side totally. Solar module production, and these are also showing where we got each of these data. Demand for solar modules, interest rate, we have money supply is also important, since in Japan it is almost zero. Therefore, we need to have another indicator that explain the money supply and explain the availability of money and accessibility of financial resources. And solar module prices, exchange rate, we use the real effective exchange rate, price of silicon, and price of oil, we use the price from different sources, and Japanese GDP. So in these slides, I just provided the final tables. However, we have done lots of works which are available in the paper. This is for simplicity that I provided, just empirical results. That in this table, we see what are the factors which are important in the demand side and in the supply side. In demand side, we see that the coefficient of GDP is significant. So this is confirming our hypothesis that yes, when we are in economic boom, when the economic growth is increasing and the GDP growth rate is increasing, therefore demand for different sources of energy, including solar, would increase. Feed-in tariff also found to be a important policy that stimulate the demand side. Price of modules is clearly it's important, and when prices are higher, therefore demand would be lower. And in the supply side, we found out that the interest rate is important. And although it's very low in Japan, and we also found that the M2, another indicator of money, is important. This is supporting the idea that accessing to cheaper financial resources would reduce the capital cost. This means lower capital cost, therefore reducing the cost of production and reducing the total cost. Therefore, it can stimulate the supply, shift the supply to forward. Price of modules and price of silicon are also important. So conclusion. Let me conclude my talks and also provide some policy recommendations which are useful not only for Japan but also for other similar economy, especially for those countries which are we don't have domestic resources and have energy insecurity issue. So the solar module market in Japan is influenced by uncontrollable external factors such as the price of silicon. So this is an important issue that government cannot do anything on this aspect. But there are some other factors that the country, the government, the financial system can help and can support for promoting it. We found out that although feed-in tariff is important, but feed-in tariff, it's a kind of manipulating the markets. For the initial stages, it is important, but gradually it need to be transited to more other sources of financing and alternatives for financing. And shifting from FIT to internal financing for solar production can ensure a sustainable growth. Because FIT, it's not clear that when it is existing now, next year it's also existing, or 5 years later it's also existing. So this means it is not a sustainable source. So these are what we recommend from the result of these studies to Japan and other countries with similar energy scheme, so that there is a need to diversify the green financing channels and deregulate. So, for example, easing the green bond issuance. Japan can streamline green bond issuance by simplifying regulatory procedure, offering incentive, and establishing clear guideline, therefore fostering the solar power market. Another suggestion that we have is that role of credit guarantee is very important. Green credit guarantee is necessary because this is one of the reasons, it can be an important policy to mitigate the risk, especially credit risk. Therefore, it can drive innovations in these fields and bringing more private investment into sustainable projects. Another important thing is role of communities. I've seen in Walter's presentation regarding community. Local community engagement is very important, involving local community in solar projects through shared ownership or benefit. Community involvement generates support and minimize the opposition. And risk mitigation, as I've mentioned earlier, main reasons that investments are not enough in these types of projects, in sustainable projects, is risk. So developing mechanism like insurance manage the risk associated with solar investment is important. And streamlined regulation, simplifying the permitting and approval processes for solar installment, clear and efficient regulation, minimization, and also making investment more appeal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fahad's presentation. We have about 25 minutes left. I actually would like to, allow our panel speakers, if you have any questions to each other, I guess it will be great if you can voice up, and then let me see if I can help facilitate. Otherwise, I can actually have a couple of questions. But I can I can refrain from asking first. Maybe our speakers actually can raise if you have any questions for now.
Maybe a question for myself to Tung, if I may.
Yes, sure, Pascal.
It was very interesting to hear, right? And maybe just would be interesting, maybe also to hear your view in terms of how you see, the market players, the corporates engaging in the market. Do you see a specific sector to do that first? Let's say maybe the fashion sector, or how do you see the market activity in terms of different business sectors engaging in the renewable energy market in Vietnam?
Thank you, Dr. Pascal. And to quickly answer this, there are a few sectors in Vietnam I think will kind of take the role in their decarbonization pathway. I think in the past 4 to 5 years, we have actively supported the tech sector, where they do have, I think, much more resources than other multinationals in the market. And they also have they have done PPAs in their own country, so they are no newcomers when it comes to Vietnam. So they know how to support their vendors or supply chains in the market. Secondly, I think the kind of fashion brands and industry really helps their vendor as well. These guys do have quite ambitious targets on their emission reductions. Hence, many of these garments and textile factories in Vietnam, whether they are Korean, Taiwanese, Japanese, they face the pressure of reducing their carbon emissions, or else they lose their order to. I think coming up next would be, I think in near future, be food processing, anything related to exports, because now we have the adjustment mechanism, the CBAM from Europe, and then some of the I think emission tax from the US as well, kicking in the next 2 years. So we do see some initiatives and requests from the food processing sector to for us to come in and help them with all of these solutions. I think at least I think the hardest to crack kind of sector is the kind of really heavy industries like cement and steel. These guys, it's difficult for them to adopt any kind of solutions when it comes to firstly power, but I think mostly it's the heat demand. The heat range that they have, is quite challenging to, support them in terms of solutions and financing. So that's just my kind of quick summary for now.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or no? Or I can. Okay. Actually, thanks so much for this, particularly for all the 4 speakers. Actually, I can hear the quite an overview of very different perspective, I would say. But actually, I can see the quite common characteristics among your presentations, because I can see an overview of different arrangements of how actually we can we can finance or we can invest in renewables by different kinds of arranging the capital into, or by a arrangement of procurement of renewables from the big consumers, for example. We can see probably the engagement of particularly investors in certain communities, as I would say is probably a social impact or charity, like the presents, and also particularly in Vietnam, I guess it is more or less actually a very concrete example actually how Vietnam is facilitating, particularly under the program, their program actually facilitating the procurement of renewables in using different arrangements. But I imagine there could be some challenges actually, even though we have so many different arrangements. We have probably including, like Pascal actually already outlined at the regional level, the government's policies, how to encourage the market, renewable energy market. So I'm not sure if probably like Pascal or Tun actually could you actually share a bit your insights, particularly in our more country and regional perspectives. What are the key challenges actually with facing, even if we have so many tools and policies actually are facilitating this kind of investments into renewables? Yeah, that maybe Pascal, you might share your light on at a regional perspective. Tun maybe can probably share light from Vietnam's perspective.
Yeah, maybe I can start just a few considerations from my end. I think, as mentioned, of course, regulatory setup is critical, right, in the different jurisdictions, allowing more or less options to engage in the renewable energy market. That's one thing, right? But I think to shed a bit more light on other aspects which might not be front of mind when we speak about these topics. I think it's also very much a question of a risk appetite within corporate. Renewable energy or energy as such is not necessarily a market where they have been engaging, or most of the companies have been engaging very directly so far, due to the nature of it being heavily regulated and monopolized in many jurisdictions. A new level of risk management involved, which I think many jurisdictions have now kind of moved towards a phase where this risk is very low, but it didn't for a long time. So there was a bit of a risk management angle, which was a hurdle to be overcome in many of the jurisdictions here in Asia Pacific. And I think the last one, just maybe to mention, I think not in all market it is yet a very commercially endeavor. I think certain regulations still have renewables as a bit of a premium compared to the incumbent electricity mix. That's a bit in contrast to the economics of renewables, which we hear and in the markets. But I think wherever there is more loosening of the market, let's say, and then the commercial side of renewables will be much more prominent also in, let's say, markets in our neighborhood here around Hong Kong.
Tun, maybe can you say something about that from your country's perspective?
Sure. And firstly, Kevin and Dr. Pascal for your sharing. I think to go off on the points about corporates and the risk that is involved in PAs, we certainly observe that's the case. I think for more traditional and PPAs like rooftop solar, at least you can in Vietnam you can have some sort of a reference point. There are multiple factories that have done so, and the newer factories can just go to some of these and look at the system and understand exactly how it works. Though when it comes to, I guess, synthetic or virtual or call it financial PPAs, this thing is like a mystery too, and the kind of details how to work out the tax, the accounting. These factories have no idea. There's no real case study in the market yet, and any kind of international case study would not be so relevant. From US or from Europe would not be that relevant to Vietnam or even other countries in the region, because we simply have a different financial market, and there's no kind of guarantee or hedging mechanism that help these contracts to be safe for corporates. So that's the first point. Secondly, I think it's getting increasingly difficult to finance these, corporate PPAs with the current economy. Investors are not willing to take on, the kind of risk of a 15 to 20 years PPAs from let's say for example, the garment or industry. There's been a hit in the country. Factories in Vietnam have been losing orders from these brands, these fashion brands. So they simply do not even have any plan that is required for this, rooftop solar PPAs. And when the kind of banks and investors look at the, the balance sheets of these, corporate off takers, they see like negative, and they see debt and everything, and they're not willing to sign off on corporate PPAs yet. So we do see a challenge in the kind of financing, especially like commercial financing for these deals. So we do try our kind of blend that with some of the grant funding, subordinated fundings, financing from I suppose um, I think foundations and bigger uh, um, bigger institutions out there. So two things. Firstly, like the risk, and then secondly is the financing aspect.
Mm, mm. Yeah, very, very interesting. I very much agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And I would also like to forward probably this about Dr. Fahad. You are also mentioning about the Japan situation, and probably you are mentioning that your recommendation could be also applicable in other countries' context. What do you think about the comments from Thun, probably in Vietnam's case? If you really compare the market in Japan and Vietnam, what do you see actually? What's the potential of actually using Vietnam's example, or vice versa? Actually, if you can, you can think about what would be the lessons learned, particularly in applying this to Japan's case. Dr. Fahad, are you here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So I think when for the case of Japan, in some aspects there are some similarities with emerging economies like Vietnam, but also some differences. So when we are looking at for example, regarding my research in Vietnam, going to be, and still it's one of the suppliers of solar modules. So therefore, the cost reduction is very important. And when we are talking about the total cost in Japan, and comparing it with Vietnam, it is much lower in Vietnam. So in the supply side, when we compare these two countries, the cost is much lower. But in the demand side, the affordability and availability of electricity, and also the affordability of the households for higher for renewable energy is higher in Japanese case. So for example, the feed-in tariff policy in the case of Japan is different from several other countries. So it is more in the demand side. It means household and consumers are mainly paying for these matters. And although for the case of Japan, it also doesn't mean that all households are able and are willing to pay higher for renewable electricity. But when comparing to developing country such as Vietnam, there is more and there is more affordability for doing that. But still, there are lots of challenges here in Japan, and that by right policies, it is possible to mitigate them. So regarding the policies, I also refer to my presentation that the cost of capital is very important. So when we are talking about the domestic manufacturers, accessing to cheaper financial resources is very important for reducing their costs. So in the case of Japan, maybe you mentioned that the interest rate is almost zero here. So it should be very easy for the manufacturer to reduce the cost. But although the cost of capital is almost near to zero, but it is very difficult to borrow from banks, because many banks are hesitating to lend to these projects and lend to risky projects. And in many cases, the projects are not able to provide collateral, provide guarantee, and so on. So this means that just looking at data that, for example, this data shows the case of Japan, the interest rate is very low, therefore the cost of production should be very low. But actually in practice, we see that many manufacturers, the supply, they have difficulties to borrow. So this means that governments should come in the middle, and by a policy such as providing guarantee, governments can help to make this lending easier. So financial resources are available here. We don't have any problem for financial resources. But it's difficult to borrow from bank because, as I've mentioned, borrower cannot provide guarantee, cannot provide collateral. This means that they cannot use these available resources. So right policy for each country, for any country, by considering the obstacles. So this means that we cannot have a remedy for all countries. We cannot mention that all countries can promote supply or stimulate demand by these policies. We cannot generalize.
Thank you. And I have a question for water. Actually, it seems like it's a little bit slightly different from perspective from other presenters, but actually I would like to actually raise a question to you because maybe for the other three presentations, maybe talking a lot actually on which is policy level and also maybe scale and on-grid renewable energy, and probably your more look like a very community level. What do you think about probably you can say a little bit more about maybe your project is mainly focusing on at the community level and maybe off-grid, I'm not sure, but how actually your project would integrate with the countries, the respective countries' grid, renewable energy grid, and how actually it will contribute to the overall. Because actually, when we are talking about policy level, we are talking about a large scale level. Maybe we are talking about a substantial contribution, but at the same time, we would like to also see the off-grid and small scale, or not necessarily small scale, but at village level or community levels, renewables are actually also making significant contributions to climate change. So if you can shed some light on this, please feel free to say something. Yeah, Mr. Walter Marine.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for the exciting question. And then here is where is the problem. As I show in my presentation, I think the large community in the world not yet realize that there is more than 1 billion people without access to electricity. When I'm talking about access to electricity, I'm talking about people don't have a light in their home, basic light. They just use kerosene, candle, they use food fire to have light in their villages, because that village is out of the range of the interest of the government, because they are too far from the transmission line. We have villages that we go to villages that they are 200, 300 kilometers away from the transmission, from the national transmission line. and you can understand the huge amount of money, huge amount of investment the local government should do to guarantee some basic electricity access to this community. So our solar home system, our mini, let's say our distributed solar system, only answer to this community and to the develop of this community, and mainly in Africa, that is the continent where we see the more progress on this one is really becoming a mainframe on the electricity plan. So I know in Asia, Southeast Asia, maybe it's not that feel the problem because the electricity rate of the country is sometimes more than 90%. We see more problem in the country like Indonesia and Philippines because there is 1,000 of island, and then maybe some island is running on diesel generator. But also we see this point that there is still a lot of generation by fossil fuel. And then if we are not going to find the answer to this one, to reduce the fossil fuel usage in providing electricity, we will never address the climate change issue.
It's very important, I think. Yeah. Still, although we are very diligent in developing renewable energy and its systems and a lot of schemes and policies encouraging energy procurement, investment, and so on, financing. But of course, it's very important to address the issues, particularly on, of course, fossil fuel is still dominant fuels actually so far in the world. And we have the time, and actually, I now have one question from the Q&A box. It's from Raymond Ho. His question is actually for Mr. Thun. He asked actually for large-scale renewable energy investment in Vietnam, the grid curtailment is an issue. Another concern for overseas investors is the foreign exchange quota. Any chance of improving in the coming years? Mr. Thun Ho, can you answer this question?
Sure, and thanks to Raymond for that question. I saw that in the Q&A box. So firstly, the curtailment problem is still present in Vietnam. At least in the short and medium term, I don't foresee that getting resolved very soon, because we do need, we're still working on the kind of detailed framework and regulatory mechanism to allow for private investment into grid upgrades. And we're working on that, and the kind of investment foresee in that effort is quite significant. So hopefully, with the signing of the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the kind of first priority for that JETP program is actually grid upgrade as compared to Indonesia. So unfortunately, not anytime soon, but hopefully in the medium to long that will get resolved. In the meantime, I think in terms of foreign exchange quota, I also don't see yet in terms of what's allowed there. So but perhaps I'm less informed about this. But to me, also something that is not in the short term kind of solutions. But happy to. I think there are a lot of policy changes in progress this year. So hopefully by next year we can already see some change in the market.
It's more or less the time. I guess if we don't have any other questions, we will actually end this section. Thanks so much for all the speakers to today's presentation. It's actually very insightful. I think it is very important that everyone bear in mind actually that there's still a lot of potential, particularly in Asia, to invest into renewables, and actually we still need to tackle a lot of issues at the policy level, regulation level, and also financial arrangements. So thank you very much, and we have to really move on from mobilizing these different investments into renewables. So thanks so much. Hope you enjoy this section, and then have to say goodbye to all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.